Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies that I have just seen as I'm driving home from the theater. And I have made no secret of the fact, I've mentioned it here on this show and in other social media posts many times, that I am a child of the 80s. I am Generation X through and through. And as a true 80s kid, it should not surprise anyone that I have a very special place in my heart for the Masters of the Universe, for He-Man and for She-Ra. They're one of the first things I ever remember being quote-unquote into. You know, I think with people of my generation, you can kind of trace our development by what brand or what franchise we were really addicted to as we grew up. I mean, for me, it started with the Muppets, and then it was He-Man, then it was Transformers, then it was Ninja Turtles, then it was Power Rangers. You know, a pretty standard arc. So while I have had deep affection for the property, what's always been interesting to me is that, unlike those other ones that I've mentioned, I don't feel the same level of dedication to it as I have to, say, the Muppets or the Transformers or the Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers. In other words, I'm very protective of those IPs and the way they are interpreted. So when a hack, like, just for privacy's sake, let's call him Michael May, makes horrid films out of, say, the Transformers or the Ninja Turtles, that really offends me deeply, because those were things I grew up with. However, I haven't felt that same level of defensiveness as it comes to the various retakes and interpretations of the Masters of the Universe franchise. And there have been a lot of them in the last several decades. And I've never really hated any of them. I've never really loved any of them. I will say that, let me give you a good example. I am an unapologetic lover of the 1987 live-action Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella. And I am not being ironic. I am being 100% honest. I rank it as one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's great 80s action sci-fi. I totally dig it. And it never bothered me, like it has so many other fans, that it wasn't cartoon accurate. We've heard people bitch about it for decades, maybe not as much as they've bitched about other things. People are still bitching about Batman and Robin, and things like that. But people have been bitching, that movie didn't have Orko. Why didn't it have Orko? Why didn't they look like they did in the cartoon? And that never bothered me. Even as a kid, when I saw it, I loved it. But there are people for whom they have been longing to see a cartoon-accurate live-action portrayal of this property for a long, long time. And so when I heard that they were doing this movie, I was interested. I can't say I was all that excited. Again, these things, Masters of the Universe, they interest me, but they don't necessarily excite me. But I will say I was interested to see how they did that. How did a more cartoon accurate live-action motion picture of the Masters of the Universe franchise, how is it going to work? And now, having seen it, I can say that it works pretty well, all things considered. All things considered, this was a really great movie. It was a lot of fun. It was very colorful, very interesting to watch, and it did some fun things with the property, but it's not perfect. If you were to ask me, and I'm going to get this out of the way now, which is the superior Masters of the Universe film, it's kind of like I said for Super Mario Galaxy. The more modern ones, yes, are more accurate to the source material, but that doesn't necessarily make them better. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot of ground to cover, so let's dive right into this. So first of all, let's talk about what works. And I do think that the adaptation of Eternia, the world of He-Man, is done very lovingly. I think that is this movie's greatest strength, is clearly it was made, written, maybe directed by, I don't know, I haven't done that much research into it, but it definitely feels like these are people who have true love for the property. And I think that is vital. It is so important with something like this. Take, for example, again, the previously mentioned Michael May adaptations of Transformers and Ninja Turtles, clearly made by a person who had no affection for the property. It's very clear. But look at, say, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. That was made by someone who had great affection for the property. It shows. And what also shows, and this is something that really touched my heart, is that they seem to have great affection for all of it. Not just the original, but for all of the various incarnations. For example, they have great affection for the 87 movie, because there are Easter eggs throughout this. Skeletor has a little side minion for one scene, like a pig boy. And that is very clearly a nod to the pig boy who's in one shot of the original movie. This was a kid who won a contest to be in the movie, and they made him Pig Boy. One of the side villains, I don't think he ever gets a line, but he's in there, is Karg, who was a mercenary in the 87 movie. He was never in the cartoon. He was a movie exclusive character. And also, okay, I'm going to say this, I'm going to throw this up, and this is just I should have said this earlier, but I want to put the spoiler alert warning up in this, because it's really, this is the biggest spoiler of the movie, in my opinion. The best moment of the movie. So this is a spoiler. If you don't want to know about it, go watch the movie first and then come back and listen to this. Okay? So the spoiler warning is in effect.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Maybe say spoiler before you give away the end of a movie, okay?
But they have a cameo from Dolph Lundgren. And not just in the background cameo, which I thought is what they were going to do with him for a second. But no, he has an actual scene with Nicholas Galitzine, the new He-Man. And Nicholas Galitzine asks him, any advice for the new guy? And he gives him advice and then leaves by saying, "Good journey." And my nerd heart just grew 3 sizes that day. It was my favorite moment of the movie. And again, it shows the respect that the filmmakers had for the legacy of this property. And you can see it in the visual styles. This movie is very dedicated to being visually accurate, or as visually accurate as it can, to the very bizarre style of the original cartoon. For those who weren't there, trying to describe the original aesthetic of this franchise, I really can't. It was such an 80s thing. Bright colors, gorgeous backdrops, a aesthetic for its heroes and villains and vehicles that was at once futuristic and yet something straight out of the Lord of the Rings. Like, how they combined all of these different visual styles to make that original cartoon and make it fluid, I will never know. I heard a critic once who said that the toy-driven entertainment of the 80s was designed to make children less imaginative. He had a larger point, but that is a statement that I vehemently disagree with. Because to sell us all of these toys, they had to capture our imaginations. And to do that, they created these worlds that are so bizarre and yet so colorful and seared into our memories. There's a reason why kids of my generation loved He-Man, the Thundercats, Silverhawks. You know, it's how things like the Ninja Turtles could exist because we accepted it all. You ever wonder why shows like Game of Thrones or more continuity-driven shows can exist in the volume that they do in this era? It's because that groundwork was laid in the 80s. Like it or not, and I'm not saying that the Reaganomics origin of these things was a blessing, but I am saying it had some benefits. And that really unique visual style is one of them. And they do a great job of recreating it here. The landscape of Eternia, the costumes, they somehow managed to make very much in the Marvel vein. They managed to make these very garish and weird and nonsensical costumes and power sets, you know, designed for these weird line of toys. They managed to make them feel tangible and logical within this world. I think this movie owes a great debt to the Thor films for making visual styles like that acceptable to modern movie audiences. More than once I looked at this. There were more than a few times this movie reminded me a little bit of the Thor films. You know, just saying. But I don't think that this film could have existed without those films. As it relates to the story, the thing that I was the most concerned with coming into this is how are they going to handle He-Man as a character? Because here's the thing about He-Man as a character from the cartoon, in that he wasn't a character. There was not a lot to He-Man. There just wasn't, guys. And we need to admit that. He was exactly what the toy said it was on the box. He was the mighty hero of Eternia. He always showed up. He always won. He always did the right thing, you know, because that was how he was designed. Yes, these were designed to sell us toys, but they wanted to make sure that the toys they were selling us came with a positive message. This is why they had the PSAs at the end. So this is something that, again, I feel the 87 film did really well. How do you get around that? You don't make He-Man the main character or the main protagonist. He's the hero, but our main protagonists are Monica Geller and Lieutenant Tom Paris. They have the arc. They have the heavy lifting. They actually handle the emotional things. It's the same reason why the Pirates of the Caribbean works better when you had Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann, so they could carry the story, and Jack Sparrow was free just to clown around and do the background stuff. So, wanting to do this now, it's like, okay, how are they going to handle He-Man as a character? And I think they did the right thing. They did a very smart job in that they didn't make He-Man the main character. They made Prince Adam the main character. And they did the same thing that James Gunn's Superman did. And said, we're not going to make this about Superman, we're going to make this about Clark Kent. And that was genius. Reimagining Prince Adam as kind of the runt of the litter, someone who felt he always disappointed his father, someone who wasn't a great warrior, someone who was being fed a lot of messaging regarding standards of masculinity that he couldn't live up to and felt like he was weak because he couldn't live up to it. And having his journey be the discovery that manhood is not measured in brute strength, but in his humanity. In other words, this movie blends, at its core, if you're talking thematically, this movie is a challenge between the very 80s view of masculinity. Keep in mind, this is a decade that brought us Schwarzenegger movies, G.I. Joe, even the Transformers, which all had a very might makes right mentality. That is a very 80s mentality when it comes to masculinity. With a more modern take on masculinity that sees it never goes so far as to say that those traits, that skill and strength and all that they're toxic. It doesn't go so far as to calling it toxic masculinity, but it's more interested in bridging the gap between those two ideals, that 80s mentality and the more modern mentality of caring, of having empathy, having humanity, that having feelings and acknowledging feelings, that those are what make a man, that combining those two things and taking the best qualities from each are what really make a man. And I was pretty happy about that. I liked that it had a theme, because again, this is a franchise that I think there has to be a theme. And I can hear some people saying, it's just a summer blockbuster. Why does it have to have a theme? Why does it have to have a lesson? Are you fucking kidding me? Having life lessons is another one of the things baked into the DNA of this fucking franchise.
Elena tried taking a magic potion which she thought would help her. Well, she found out there aren't any magic potions. And you know what? There aren't any magic drugs either. Anytime you take one from anybody but your parents or your doctor, you're taking a very big chance. You're gambling with your health, maybe even your life.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
So the fact that they did it and had that message and very clearly pointed it out, I applaud. So again, smart choices. Actually giving Prince Adam, and by extension He-Man, character arcs. I also think the movie is fairly well cast. I think Nicholas Galitzine does a pretty good job as Prince Adam as He-Man. I feel like he kind of got a little trapped in that Star-Lord, Taika Waititi, Thor, kind of weird spot, the snarky hero. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But I think he did very well with the emotional scenes he was allowed to have. Idris Elba is great as Man-at-Arms, and I like that there's a mirroring story arc with him that matches the one that's going on with Prince Adam. Camila Mendes is great as Tila. Yeah, it's a well-cast film, and I think it works pretty well.
Then nothing someone says before the word but really counts.
But.
This is where I have to get a little overly analytical, and maybe I'm dissecting this movie too much. Again, on the whole, I think this movie works pretty well. Better than I thought it had any right to. But the thing that is missing, and the thing that is wrong with it, is that this film constantly, almost without fail, just will not stop taking the piss out of itself. And what I mean by that is there is hardly a scene, there is hardly a moment, there is hardly an instance in this that happens where there's a real emotional moment, or there's a real stand up and cheer moment, or whatever, where they don't feel the need to stop the action and do a wink and nod to the audience, do some joke about how silly this is. And it's not that you can't do that. This is something I think that people don't give Marvel movies the credit that they deserve for this, because Marvel is great at creating crowd-pleasing films and moments that kind of call, hang a lampshade on, how silly the costumes may be, or how ridiculous the premise may be. But it's a quick wink and a nod, and then it's back into actual character-driven pieces. And despite what you may think, yes, all of the Marvel films are very character-driven. This one, in some ways, it does it very well. Here's an example. So part of the plot is that when Skeletor's forces invade, Prince Adam and the Sword are sent to Earth to hide. And this is where we get our first Thor moment, where he is separated from the Sword. And he's sent there as a kid. He's there on Earth for 15 years. And he grows up, he knows who he is, and everyone thinks he's crazy. And then he gets to go back home, and the movie happens, right? Well, part of his, this thing to keep his story alive and remember who he was while he was on Earth, was he gave a lot of the people that he had seen, a lot of the people he had known the history of, but didn't actually know who they were, he gave them all names. Names that a kid would come up with, like Ram Man, like Fisto, like Mechaneck. Names that were ridiculous when they were, when they came out, but they were aimed at young kids. And so to have a young kid make those names up and name drop them, that made sense. That's a good way to explain it. But the movie has to stop every other minute to do something like that. So again, for example, yes, everyone and their brother has made a joke about the name Fisto. All right? Yes, we've all seen the meme that's a clip from one of the old comics. Yeah, ha ha ha. I tried to fist them all. I just can't fist anymore. He he he. Ho ho ho. So yeah, we've all seen it. We've all heard the joke. And this movie makes that joke. Okay, fine. And then it makes it again. Okay. And then it keeps making it and keeps making it and just won't let up. It's like, we get it. It's a dumb name that now has a sexual connotation. Ha ha ha. Aren't you fucking funny? And they do this so much. Again, there is hardly a moment where this does not happen. There's a scene where all of our heroes are walking out of a dust cloud, and they're doing that cool heroes in a line walk, that tombstone walk, and then they all start coughing in slow motion, and then, it's so dusty. It's like, fucking A, just let us have a cool fucking moment. And nowhere is this more evident than in the villains. Remember how I said the film was fairly well cast? Fucking A. And I don't necessarily blame it on Jared Leto and his portrayal of Skeletor. It's in the writing, and again, I think they were trying to be comic accurate, because comic and cartoon Skeletor was a complete fucking joke. He had a great look, but that was it. Because it was a cartoon for kids. You couldn't make a villain really scary, And so, yes, he has a great look in this, and at certain times he has a neat voice and he says really batty things, but then they have to immediately undercut it. He does his evil laugh, ha ha, ha, and none of the bad guys laugh along, and I was done. When I raised my hand, I was done, and you should have kept going. And Evil Lynn is like breaking character, like they're actors in a play, going, oh well, we'll try it next time. We'll take that note for next time. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, and it just makes what this is a byproduct of. And I blame this strictly on my generation. This is something my generation came up with. It started in the 90s, all right? Because in the 90s, when we were all just way too cool, you couldn't admit you liked anything, because only squares liked things in the 90s. We came up with this concept of irony. Yeah, I'm listening to this, I'm watching this cartoon, but I'm doing it ironically. I don't really enjoy it, because God forbid we admit that we enjoy anything. And that became an overcorrection in the 2000s. It became such an overcorrection, that we couldn't admit that we liked goofy things. Everything had to be serious. This is why the last several Batman movies have sucked every inch of joy out of the franchise, that it's almost depressing to watch, But we had to do that to convince ourselves that it was okay that we still liked this thing that we liked as kids. And it isn't until recently, with the reevaluation of things like Batman 66 and the like, the original Spider-Man had a hand in this. The Marvel Cinematic Universe had a hand in this. That you could still like something that is sincere. That you could still like something that maybe is a little cheesy, and maybe that cheese factor is part of what made it good in the first place. That it's okay to like the goofiness of He-Man. It's fine. But this movie feels like it has to constantly hang a lampshade on every aspect of this. And it weakens it. Say what you want, but Jared Leto, he is no Frank Langella. And this movie needed a Frank Langella villain. It needed a Skeletor that was not goofy. And we didn't get it. And this overriding sense of self-parody, it's fine in little doses, but then they carry on so much with it that it even undercuts its message. Again, it's great that it has a theme. It's great that it had amoral, for lack of better terminology. But you undercut it so much. You joke about it so much that we don't actually get the lesson that the movie is trying to teach us. You know? Again, yes, the 87 movie was over serious and didn't have the color scheme and the wild characters of the cartoon, but there's a reason I truly love that movie, and that is its message. They took seriously, and they handled it with gravitas and didn't undercut it by having to be goofy immediately after.
Look, you've got the wrong songmaker, Gwildor. All right, I'm just a stupid keyboard player in a high school band. There's a million of me.
Only one of you, Kevin. Only one of anybody.
I think that is one of the most underrated moments and lines in film history. I really do. I think about that moment a lot. So I know I'm overanalyzing. And I know I'm being a little bit of a downer because, again, this is a great summer movie. It's a great popcorn film. It's a great time out. I'll be interested to know kind of what younger audiences think of this. The people who didn't grow up with it. You can tell my generation are like really, really chomping at the bit for this. But I'm curious what, younger, teenagers now might think of it. But I think it's fun. It has that Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor kind of aesthetic. It's enjoyable. The cast is generally pretty good. And yeah, I just think that if they had just pulled back a little on the self-parody, that I think you would have had something really great. That's my opinion. Maybe they'll do better on the next one. And I gotta say, mid-credit sequence, I was waiting for that, and I am hoping we get a whole movie of just that. I don't want to do a crossover yet. Make this a true cinematic universe. Give me an entire fucking movie of that. And when you see the film, and most fans of the show can probably guess what I'm talking about, because I was never as big a fan of He-Man as I was of its sister show. And yeah, just fucking am. Like, yes, I want to see that right fucking now. So I hope maybe they can tone it down a little bit. But I guess even if they don't, the movie is still fun. You'll still have fun with it. So yeah, I think anything else, I'm just going to be talking in circles. So let's wrap this up. So final grade for Masters of the Universe 2026, I'm giving it a B-. B-. Fun, enjoyable, things that annoyed me that probably won't annoy a lot of other people, but yeah, I think it's a fun time, and 80s kids are going to have a good time with it. So go and make your own decisions. Okay, so there you have it. There's my review of Masters of the Universe. So thank you for coming along. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to an aging Generation Xer rant about a movie based on a toy line he had when he was a kid. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're having a great summer. Take care, and as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.